Hello, hello, hello. Oh, my camera is way off here. There we go. Good morning, good morning. I'm let's see. Yeah, I had I was about to say mindfulness revelation. I meant mindset revelation. Where do I go? Maybe we can just look at the Excalibur. Okay, so the revelation I had is basically this. I really want to, like, for me, mental models is incredibly important. And I wanted to emphasize how this reducer is different than a traditional reducer. And by not calling it actions, but calling it events, it kind of clicked. Like, that's how we really differentiate them. So in a traditional reducer, you have the concept of state and action. So you define this single object as a bunch of values. That's your state, right? So there are no different versions of that object. There's just one object where you change out the values of that object. And when you send an action, that action dictates or orders the reducer to make changes to that state. Like it's like that's what dispatch means. It means like it's an order. And then you give all this state to the UI, and the UI has to interpret all these values to figure out what am I going to display to the user. But when we call it context and event instead, we make the event, we call it send. We don't dispatch. Oh, maybe we should change that. So we say dispatch. And here we say, oh yeah, this helps. And here we say send. So here we dispatch. And here we send. We're just saying to the reducer, okay, something happened in the environment now. How does this affect the current state? And then the reducer checks the event. Is this something I should deal with in my current state? And it possibly creates a new state and then passes that context to the UI. And the UI now just needs to check that one state property to figure out what it's going to display to the user, and then what related values you have available to you in that specific state. So that's like the core difference. There's a few details here I'm not highlighting. I'm not highlighting that you actually do have additional values on these different contexts. Yeah, but maybe I don't need to do that at this level. Anyways, so what we were originally talking about is this pattern that emerged, that you can actually drive a feature with the state of another feature. So specifically what we wanted to do here, do I have my drawing? Here we are. What we specifically wanted to do is that this state is like a loading state, but it's two different loading states. It's related to the app authenticating and when it's loading the data. That's the same thing we want to display. But the question is but when we are authenticating, we don't have a user and a family ID, but when we are loading, we do have a user and a family ID. So the question is how do we put this stuff together? Should this dashboard be dependent on both the authentication and the dashboard? And then that UI needs to figure out how to display this? Or could we make the dashboard feature rather dependent on the authentication? And the dashboard exposes a state where it's saying that I'm just waiting for authentication to resolve itself. So that's the new pattern that emerged, and I want to explore that. Yes, that's one thing. The other thing is I realized that POC is not a good name for an environment. It's sandbox. It's a sandbox environment. So I updated the drawings for that as well, like the mental model. Where are you? Yeah, as you can see here, sandbox. So we're going to rename that into sandbox because that's basically what it is. It's sandboxing the environment. Or you're in a sandbox environment. You're not in a proof of concept environment. It sounds weird. Anyways, did we... Yes, let's keep this. We haven't actually added any features yet. Oh, didn't I? Oh, don't you have a source folder in Next.js? Do you just have pages? Or did I set this up wrong? Doesn't matter. New folder, features, we'll do it this way. But yeah, what we want to do first before we actually dive into the features is that we want to... Okay, so we diverged a bit. There's a couple of things we need to fix first. First of all, we need to implement in our sandbox a possibility to set the week task activity. And then we need to talk about subscriptions, because we need to subscribe to some data. So we need to add that to our interface, our environment interface. Anyways, yeah. And then like we have to decide how do we pass in the family UID. The family ID. Do we pass it in on every entry in the interface? Or do we do something else? So we talked about like having, okay, let's finish that conversation. We need the family ID for all of these requests to find it, find its source of like the source of the data. So we said like set family ID as bringing in some statefulness into this interface, which is not ideal. Like, it's perfectly okay if these entries doesn't really depend on the family ID being set or not. It's just, hello, Melissa. Oh, is this a bot? Anyways, let's see. Yes. But here, like when the family ID is not set, these entries become invalid. But if these entries didn't depend on the family ID being set or not, that would be a good way to go, because these are still valid even though you haven't called this. What we could do instead is that we could change the interface here. We could change the interface to be, let's see, it would rather look like this, family ID. And what it returns is the actual interface. So we have basically created like a factory. So you would basically say, ask for the interface whenever you wanted to interact with it, like the storage. You're basically saying, give me the storage of this family ID, which is really interesting. And I want to explore that just because it's different. And the way we would implement this in the sandbox is that we would rather say like this, and then we'll just return that. And then we have family ID right there. Right? So that's a string now. So now we have what we need. And the way we would consume this is like in the effect, like we would do it a little bit differently. We would do this. We would rather return the effect. And then whenever, so accessing the storage would be, oh, sorry, this is the authenticated. Oh my God, can I kick people from, can I do that? What's this? Oh. Report. Yep. Wow, that's really annoying. That's really annoying. Yeah, interesting. Anyways, so the idea here is that you would rather return this. I'm not sure if this is a good idea. We're just exploring. Are you kidding me? How do I get this person off? Block user. Anyways, let's see. So you would say like the storage. We will kind of. How will we do this? Family storage would then be storage, and then you would kind of go and grab the. You would say like auth family ID. Yeah, I want to explore that. The tricky thing here is, are you kidding me? Is this how YouTube streaming works? Like you set up a stream and then there's just a bunch of... Wow, this really sucks. This makes me so sad. This makes me super sad. Oh well, I guess we'll just drop the comments then. Let's see. Is it possible to like remove the comments? Anyways, I'll just turn off the comments. Like I won't react to them. Preferences, play app sounds. Nope. That's so sad. I wonder how people deal with this. Let's see. Yeah, the only tricky thing about like having this like factory is that now we actually need to be authenticated to use it, which means that we might not be authenticated. Yeah, I guess, yeah, the thing I did now wrong is that this should really be like this, I think. And then you would do family storage share. Oh, wait a minute. That's not right either, because now we don't know that we are authenticated. Okay, maybe this pattern doesn't really work. Maybe it doesn't really work. Yeah, like we would have this problem no matter. Like here we want to grab the family ID. Yeah, this is interesting. How do we want this to work? Like what we could do is when we send the event, we could pass the family ID into the dashboard so that you would actually have access. But then it's, now you have the family ID in two different places. Wow, this is surprisingly tricky. Yeah, maybe the right thing here is to actually... Let's explore how we would do this in the actual dashboard component. So the other strategy is like you have a dashboard and you would say auth equals use auth. And then you have dashboard equals use dashboard. And we would say return match auth. Yeah, maybe this is the way to do it. Sorry. Yeah, now, yeah, this makes more sense now. Because as I said, like in the actual app, like it doesn't matter. Like we want to go straight to this view, no matter what your authentication is, which means that when you are authenticating, we will return the skeleton. If you are unauthenticated, we will return the skeleton with the model, sign in model, right? And if you are authenticated, then we return the actual content. well, sorry, not cond. If you're actually authenticated, then we're going to match. Sorry. Yeah, how would this work? Yeah, sorry. Oh, wait. No, we're still in a bind here. Wow, maybe I'm thinking about this the wrong way. Because what I was thinking is now you can like do unloading. We'll still do like skeleton here. And then like loaded, we would actually show the content. But we have a problem because the dashboard would naturally start in the loading state, but that's invalid. It shouldn't move forward until we are actually authenticated. That is interesting. And the only problem, it's UI. Like I don't have any issues solving this. It's just because I want this UI to be okay. So like the way you would solve this is that you wouldn't have using the dashboard there. You would rather load it here. Like here you would actually dashboard content, for example. But the thing is, like, you would have the dashboard feature first, and then because that's responsible for loading the data, and then you would have dashboard content. The problem is that now this skeleton, I want to reuse that inside this one. So if we're loading, I want to show the skeleton. But what's happened now is that I have this feature in between, and React will it will see that there's a new component here, which means it kind of remounts the skeleton. So if the skeleton has any animations or anything, you will see that flicker. I actually have this problem in the Excalidraw application. Well, problem. Little issue in the Excalidraw, and I'm trying to like figure out how would you actually deal with how would you actually deal with that? So one way to deal with it, I just wanted to show how that looks like, because this is kind of what I want. The only problem here is that, as I said, the dashboard shouldn't be loading here. So the thing we could do is like, we could have this pending authentication, but then it becomes weird again, because I would have to define pending authentication here, but this would never occur. Because when you're authenticated, you can't be in pending authentication. So we're kind of stuck. There's something wrong about the approach here. What are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? Maybe I have to think about this and we can talk about the subscriptions instead. Yeah, this is really, really interesting. Wow, this is so fascinating. Why can't we why can't we show that in two different states with two different features? It has to be, that's the thing, like what makes it like imagine we are having like a transition effect, and we want that we want the same skeleton to render in based on two different features. So we have an auth feature and we have a dashboard feature. Now the thing is, by its very nature, if the same UI is being presented by two different features, it basically means it will jank. And the reason is that if the auth feature is using skeleton and then it moves into the right state, it means that now you get dashboard feature skeleton. And this is what causes the jank in the UI. So if you truly want this to be the same thing, you really want to have only one feature representing that view, which would be the dashboard feature. But the dashboard feature will need to know about the auth, which is what we're basically doing here. So we're kind of back to where we started. And the issue here is that the auth needs to we need to consume any state of the auth. So as long as it's not authenticated, yeah, and we can't like have condition. This is so interesting. So I do like this, like pending authentication, because that's what's actually happening. And then we look at the auth, and when it's authenticated, we notify our dashboard about that, and then it can move into the loading state. The problem is that we want information from the auth. But at this point, we have no idea what, like we know implicitly that the only way it can move to loading is when the auth is actually resolved. Because that's happening here, like authenticated, it sends an authenticated event, and it moves from pending authentication to loading. Which basically means it should really pass the family ID to the dashboard. Yeah, that would work. It would definitely work. So you would actually get family ID. That's part of the authenticated state, and you will pass it in like this, and then you're okay. We do have the family ID. We can grab the storage in that context, and now we can do like family storage get blah or get tasks, and it knows. Yeah, like I've spent a lot of time thinking about this now, but this is about patterns, right? Discovering patterns, and this is certainly a pattern. It's just like moving from one pattern we already have that kind of instantly emerges is when you have multiple states. So for example, you have state loaded, for example, and it has some data, and then you move into a different state, which is state syncing, and you still want data here. And what you have to do when you transition between these two states is that you move the data from one state to the other, and it's basically the same thing we're doing here. It's just that we're moving family ID from one feature to another. That's what we're doing. And if for some reason you were to like unauthenticate and then authenticate with a different family, like the same thing would happen. Like it will move that family ID in. So there's no risk of like suddenly signing out and then you don't have the right family ID anymore, stuff like that. So I think that's like the pattern that emerges. One thing is moving data between state transitions, but then you also have the possibility to move data between features. Okay, so we're going to try this, see how that feels like. Because the way this would work then is that we do this. pending authentication, no access. Let's see. Loading would be the skeleton. And then loaded would be the actual content. So this is how it would look now, which is much nicer, right? I guess no access is the wrong term. It would be not authenticated. No access would actually also be... No, that's not a valid... That's not a state we have, because you can't really... Like, there's no... Like, the family ID isn't part of the route. It's like it's tied to your authentication. So you can't really access some other family. Either you do have access, or you like either you're authenticated and you have access, or you are not authenticated and you need to sign in. Anyways, wow, that was a lot of thinking. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. Not authenticated. All right, let's move on with the stuff. So we have let's see. Like, I wonder how many people are actually watching this. Is it just bots watching me? I was so happy, like, oh, it's like 5 people on the live stream. It's fucking bots. Can I see? Yeah, can I see like participants? No, I can't see that. Yeah. Ah, Justin, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I have to go on YouTube and figure out how people deal with bots and stuff. Okay, so we have set week task activity, and we expect it to return an updated week task activity. So what we can do here, we can basically just return... Well, first of all, we actually have to update the weeks. So we have weeks, and this is the ID. Oh yeah, we have to... Oh, that's wrong in the interface. We have to... so this would be like week ID and then user ID. So we say week ID and user ID. Weeks, week ID, user ID equals... Oh, sorry. Week ID, tasks, user ID. And then we actually set the week task activity, which is this array, isn't it? Oh, I wish there was a way to like look at this and then dive further into the type. It's kind of annoying. Week task activity. Yeah, that's the array. Why is it complaining? Isn't that oh, sorry. Oh, it's not... Oh, sorry. It's week ID, task ID, and user ID. That's it. Yeah, I was completely mistaken in the interface. Of course, if you want to manipulate a week, you need to know which week are we working on, which task are we working on and which profile are we flipping. Let's see, tasks, task ID, user ID. There we go, now it's happy. So we'll update that, and then we'll just return the week task ID. In this case, we just return what we got. And that should be okay, except, yeah, it's async, good. Cool. Yes, so before we're very close to moving into, oh, Jason, yeah, that's, yeah, Jaren, thanks for letting me know that there's real people here. Thanks for, yeah, React States. It's been a huge revelation for me. Like, just thinking about a library as, like, React is really powerful. It has some powerful primitives, but it's very difficult it's very low level. And like, React has enabled so many, like, it's this presentation, rethinking best practices. And what amazes me about React is that it's not about rethinking, like, what they meant about that is to rethink how you, like, update a UI, I think. But it goes way beyond that because it's so low level, so that we get the possibility to rethink a lot of different things. So what I'm rethinking is, like, what does it mean to help people build applications? Like, I've been building state management libraries, but that's like just one tiny piece of building applications. There's a lot more to it, and I think it's worth more to rather introduce, like, full architectures, like, not API surfaces, but how do you think about things? What are your patterns? What are your best practices? This is a guide to building applications in React in a certain way, and it includes everything that's related to building an app. Everything from, well, managing the state, but also managing side effects, writing tests, dealing with errors, this mental idea of separating the environment from the application, all this stuff. This is things that frameworks doesn't really give you. Frameworks are like API surfaces. They're not mental models and patterns and abstractions necessarily. But anyways, yeah, so that's what I really like about React States. It's that, like, the code for React States is so minimal. It's just a few lines of code, but it enables all these patterns and mindsets and separations. And yeah, anyways, I'm starting to ramble. Yeah, and I also really love how the code turns out. It's really interesting how you can, like, just dive into a feature and then you see instantly, okay, what different states have I implemented here? You don't have to interpret this, like, big single object of a ton of values that has, like, string or null or user or null, or, like, you don't see the different states that the UI is going to consume. But with this approach, you actually see that, which is really, really cool. Yeah, anyways. So one thing we have to talk about before we start implementing and testing out stuff, it's the subscriptions. And what we need to subscribe to is updates to the shopping list. We need, and basically the shopping list is just, it's actually all the groceries that has a count. So it's not like you don't really create a shopping list. You just add a count to the groceries, and that becomes, like, the shopping list, which is kind of interesting. So basically we need to listen to the groceries and the updates on the groceries. And this ties into, like, adding and removing a grocery as well. So that's really nice. So we need a single subscription for that. And then we need to listen for adding and removing tasks. That's the second subscription. And we need to listen to week updates, or basically not really week updates, but what do we call it? Task week, week task activity updates. So we have 3 different kinds of subscriptions. So before I forget them, let's write them in here. So we need subscribe to groceries, and that takes, well, now we have the family ID, so we can just subscribe with a listener, and that listener will get, what should it get? Should it get, I guess it should get the single grocery, right? Oh, why am I having such a hard time writing that? Grocery. And that's void. And this should return a disposer. Like all subscriptions should return a disposer. Okay, so we subscribe to the groceries. We get a single grocery update. Cool. And then we need to subscribe to tasks. So what's interesting about Firebase is that you fetch and subscribe at the same time. Because there is this tiny issue where, like, you might, if you get the tasks first and then you subscribe, you might have a task that's added that won't pop up, right? So really you should subscribe to tasks first and then you go grab them. And if you happen to someone adding a task exactly at this moment, you might end up like getting all the tasks, including the new one, but it also pops up on the subscription, right? That might happen. And I guess also what can happen is, yeah, like that might happen. But that doesn't matter, like, because then we're just overriding it, and that's perfectly fine. Or I guess you could get like I guess there's some scenario where you could get like an updated grocery on the subscription while you're grabbing groceries, and then grabbing the groceries happens after you subscribe, but for some reason it's the old data. So you're not 100% sure to actually get, like, it's such an insane edge case, but like technically it would be possible. So that's why I believe Firebase has this concept of like you can just get the data as well, but you have this on snapshot and that instantly triggers. So you kind of get the initial snapshot first. So it kind of ensures the order of things. Should we care about that here? Well, it's kind of interesting. Like with GraphQL, for example, you would actually query the data first and then you would subscribe to it. Yeah, happy that you like it, Jeroen. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Jeroen. Yeah. Have a good day. We'll talk later. Yeah, I wonder how GraphQL deals with this. Like, what if you query some data and then you set up the subscription? What if someone added something between you querying the data and setting up the subscription? Or what if you set up the subscription first, and for some reason when you grab the data, I don't know. Let's not deal with that. The important thing is that you always set up a subscription before you go and grab the data, so that you don't end up in a situation where you grab the data, someone adds something between you grabbing the data and setting up the subscription. Because if you set up the subscription, someone adds something which triggers the subscription, and you go and grab the data, then grabbing that data will include that latest updated thing that came in on the subscription. So you basically just override it. Okay, subscribe to tasks. This is a task. And then we have subscribe to week task activity. Yeah, and the question is, what are we subscribing to? Are we subscribing to a specific user? I guess we are. We talked about this last time. Subscribe to week task activities. Or week task activity. Should it return? So when I'm doing set week task activity, it will return the array we have here on that specific user. But then the subscription will trigger. And what will that subscription do? I think it should trigger for that specific user. So you listen to updates from specific users. Like that should give the best possible experience, I think. Like we could listen to, like at what level do we set up the subscriptions? Do we set it up for the whole week? Yeah, I think we do. Because what happens is that, yeah, exactly. The way the task ID is added here is when someone toggles like the first time. Yeah. That's when it actually adds the task ID there. And we need to know about that. So if I'm looking at the overview, like I'm looking at like this overview here, and then for example my no, wait, how will this work? No, sorry, no. So yeah, this is interesting. Get week. I'm not sure if this should actually be there. No, wait, no, that's right. So yes, it should be like this. So it's empty now, right? And then my girlfriend clicks Monday. And that will actually, it will try to, like it will write to the database the task ID, user ID, week task activity. And then I will get a subscription update on basically subscribe to week tasks. That's what we have to do. So that I will then get like a single task ID with a single user having updated that array. And the way this works in the UI is that the UI produces a week based on all the tasks available. And it draws up the UI based on all the profiles available. So it basically creates an empty template of the whole week with all the users and nothing's filled in, right? And then it gets this week data, and then it maps that on top of that empty template. So basically, when we render out this task coming from the list of tasks, we look at, okay, do we have a task ID of that in our week? Oh, we do. Okay, great. And what users has actually populated their activities? Oh, this one user. Okay, and it's true on the first array. Okay, let's make that active. So that, yeah, that's how it's going to work. So the important thing is that we subscribe to all the tasks so that we know when someone adds and I guess removes. I guess we don't really remove a task ID. It would just be like false on all the entries, which is perfectly fine. We don't have to optimize that. Cool. So subscribe to week tasks would then be, well, let's call it subscribe to week. It doesn't matter. We can subscribe to the whole week. Now the interesting thing is, that if we subscribe to the whole week, this is the tricky thing. No, maybe this is okay. I'm just thinking ahead, like how would I deal with this in React? So, okay, so any change to any array entry would actually produce a completely new week. Which means that if anyone, and the problem is that the tricky thing is that if we get a completely new week on any change, that means that React will also get a completely new week on any change, meaning that it will need to reconcile the whole shebang, the whole UI on every single tap, which is not what we want. Yeah. We don't really want that. So from a simplicity perspective, and this is the challenge with React, it's you have to think about this stuff. Or you will get into performance issues in the UI. So the point is, I don't want any update to these buttons to reconcile the whole thing. I think that will become a problem, which means I need to get more granular updates. So I could do subscribe to, but the problem then is if I subscribe to week tasks, I have to at least go at that level, which means that whenever a task is added or removed, or maybe I can make my subscription like subscribe to week task activity, week tasks activity, week, set week task activity. When I get back here, I don't only get the task. I will get, okay, I'm subscribing to, oh, did I forget to, I need to subscribe, oh, this is, Okay, so what I get back is I get the week ID, I get the task ID, and I get the week, what do we call it? Week task activity. Well, I get the user ID, okay. And I get the activity. Okay, so if we set it up like this is, and I'm not sure how we're going to implement this in Firebase, but what I really want, I want to subscribe to the changes of the activity, but I need to know like what week task activities actually changed, which means that I need a week ID, I need a task ID, and I need a user ID. And then this is ideal for this application. So I have a single subscription that allows me to update granularly any, like a specific, like this is what actually will reconcile. Or actually update. Like it, of course, it reconciles more, but like there's no actual, like I can use React memo. As if my girlfriend updates this and this is coming in on a subscription, like it will, like this thing is a React memo that sees that all the week activities are the same. It's the same array, so I don't need to do anything there. This is what I want to consume from the perspective of the app. So now it's up to us later when we actually implement it in the browser to actually give an implementation that does this, and we'll figure that out. But this is nice. This is nice. Okay, cool. So what we need to do, let's just do that quickly so we can kind of finish that. Subscribe to groceries. I'm not sure how we're going to, like in the sandbox, we don't really do anything with this. And just returns. What did I do wrong? Oh, I guess it's just missing the rest. Like we don't actually do anything with these subscriptions in the sandbox. So this is something these subscriptions is something we need to test in when we move into the test environment. Because then we're going to create mocks for these that we can trigger data on. And then we'll see if the UI actually updates. What this approach has made me reflect on, though, is that now we're defining an interface first. We use a sandbox so that we can get on like exploring the implementation. And then we're going to write the tests that ensures that it actually does what we want. But what about actually making Firebase work with this interface? How do we ensure that Firebase actually correctly produces, like triggers this listener in the correct way? And I guess that's kind of where we can't write any tests, because this is, or then it would have to be like a full integration test, which is just way more complicated to deal with in terms of Firebase. But yeah, I guess that's the point of integration. Like you can create unit tests for everything in your app, except when you want to test the actual environment, right? So that's the cool thing. Like typically you do integration tests because it's so difficult to write the tests because you point to the environment all the time. That's, yeah, wow. I think that was a revelation for me. It's the environment that forces you to write integration tests. But when we make the environment a separation, then suddenly you can write unit tests for everything. Like unity tests. Like you might write the test that's like unit tests are basically like input output. We allow you to like move between multiple states, but it's still closer to a unit test than an integration test in my mind. And then when you want to, so basically when you use the browser as an environment, that's when you want to use an integration test, something like Cypress or something like that. But as long as you're in the sandbox or in the test environment, you don't need integration tests. You don't need Cypress. Yeah, interesting. Anyways, okay, so we have our interfaces ready. Next time we will actually start implementing the UI. Like I could go ahead now and start writing tests for this, like implementing the features and writing tests for them, but I don't think we should. Yeah, I'm not sure about the order there, because I really want to I want to explore the UI first. That's the thing I want to do. I'm not sure if I've created the correct solution here, and I want to figure that out before I start investing in tests. So we're just going to write some features, and we're going to implement the UI, and we're actually going to produce a full sandbox here that I can deploy, and then my girlfriend can test it and give feedback. And like you can test it as well if you want to and give feedback. And then when we think we have the right solution, then we invest in the tests to make sure that the subscriptions trigger correctly and everything. And then we'll actually get into implementing Firebase. Cool. That's good for now. Thanks for following along, and I guess I'll talk to you tomorrow then.